Coming up, what went wrong for Big Blue on Sunday that led to another loss at the hands of the Commanders? We dive in next. Yes, my friend. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, wealthy, and wise, and talking about what did not go right for the New York Football Giants on Sunday, losing to the Commanders for the second time this year. As a matter of fact, no longer the scheduled wins on the docket there for Big Blue. And we let you know, of course, Andy, that today's episode is brought to you by Personam. Personam is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. It improves your vision to your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms just can't do. Personam's always vigilant and always learning. Go check out personam.ai today. Andy, how we doing?
Well, Adam, the only thing that's more painful than watching the Giants slowly decay is the fact that I am moving. And if anyone knows anything about
It's
moving,
fun, right?
It's literally I try to categorize like which is worse, seeing the Giants die a slow death every single game that we watch them, or having to like haul furniture that is way too burdensome, with the chance that as I'm getting older in age that I am definitely going to injure myself more likely than actually have a successful move at this point. So, Adam, I am doubly upset today because the Giants lost and I'm also moving couches and furniture. It's tough to be me right now.
You heard you heard it here first. Andy might not make it. That's the bottom line. We dive into the coverage of this game, and I thought about it in a couple of key areas. Obviously, there's the overall and the matchups and what worked and what didn't, but there's some takeaways I think that matter here. And if I'm just looking at a high level in this game, it's 12 minutes. You get down to the end of this thing and you look at the final box score and you go, well, the Giants, they were there 27-22, a real opportunity to win this one. But the Giants score in the second quarter. There's 12:21 left to go before the half. And after that, they go ahead and surrender back-to-back possession touchdowns for the Washington Commanders. And there's things inside of that in terms of individual matchup play. But it was that moment where, and this isn't anything breaking news here, but you were actually in that game. Whether or not you thought you could win it, whether or not every Giants fan who probably wasn't at the stadium, probably selling off the tickets over the back end of the season, thought they had a real chance to win it, you score a touchdown, you go, okay, we are in this football game. Now our defense that has injuries and has been struggling and can't quite get pressure, okay, fine. If you can just help shut this down, maybe we get it back. Maybe we get a field goal. Let's see how this plays out. 14 points later, you get all the confirmation of what was probably growing inside of you of how we're not going to be able to win this game, how we're going to struggle to stop Jaden Daniels, and we keep getting stared in the face about decisions made or not made coming into this season.
It's wildly frustrating too because Adam, it's why stats can be misleading. If you look at the stats from the game specifically, and you didn't watch the game at all, you'd say,
First, hit the box score and take a look at the team stats.
Right. Just go over to the team stats and say which team won this game and put those stats in front of you. The Giants were 6 of 11 on third down. They were 2 for 2 on fourth down. They were 50% on third down. They ran the ball aggressively. They ran the ball for 164 yards. They were averaging 5.3 yards per rush. It looked like the Commanders could, based on the box score, couldn't do anything. The Giants had the time and possession. You look at all these things and you're like, oh, clearly the Giants must have won this game, right? And yet you turn around and you're like, at 21-7 before halftime, the game was over. It felt like everything else was going to be window dressing. Obviously, the Giants made a little comeback towards the end. But when it's 21-7 and things look as bleak as they do, the box score doesn't feel representative of just how far away I think the Giants were in this game. And it felt like it was over by halftime for me. I don't know if it felt the same way for you.
Yeah, of course. And listen, I said 12:21 to go in the second quarter. It's a 6-minute drive for Washington that leads to the touchdown. They go ahead and kick it away. And again, it's a 4th and 8 when the New York Giants, 5:30 to go, punt the ball away. Right. So it's more than just. And that's why it's not just the score at halftime 21-7. It's that you saw a long 6-minute drive for Washington, touchdown. And it is coming on the heels of putting together a scoring drive. But then you go ahead and give a classic 3 and out. Put the ball back in. So a minute later, Washington's right back on the ball. They go down and score. And obviously, even that next touchdown that they ended up putting together there, that ended up being, it's a lengthy drive for only 5 minutes, but they put it in right at the end of effectively the half. So there's no opportunity for the Giants to try to put something together again there. So I mean, listen, this isn't anything new. The Giants are a 2-7 football team. And I think that one other thing from a high level when we talk about these critical moments is you just look at it and you go 27-22. Yeah. And you know what? We've done this in years past. I think fans have as well. Remember, a lot of fans did this coming into the season. We'll go back to last year. Remember that one play here, if they had made the right call, sometimes looking at referees, right? No pass interference, all those things. Great, grand, wonderful. Now, when you go back and look at it, it really doesn't matter that to look at the Giants' schedule and say, well, you know, if you look over the course of this season, it was only a one-possession game against Pittsburgh, one-possession game against Washington. Oh, got blown out against Philly. You're only down. You only lost by 10 against Cincinnati, only 9 against Seattle in the win, right? All these things. It doesn't matter. The results are the results. This is a team that, in spite of the fact that if you just didn't watch the games all year and looked over their schedule, you'd go, oh, they came close in a lot of these games. Maybe they're not that far away. And I think the reality when you watch the full game tells you a different story, right? And that's what we've learned just week over week this year is they're not that close. They're not just this one thing away, even beyond when we talk about quarterback play, et cetera.
Yeah, Adam, you hit the nail on the head. When you think about this and you're like, oh, a ball could have bounced the right way or the wrong way, and oh, you could squint and you could see a couple more wins on that schedule. And like, sure, that could be the case, Adam. It absolutely could. But the whole thing is very simple. Does that change us from a 4-win team to a 6-win team? Like what are we actually talking about here? The New York Giants aren't good enough to have these mistakes happen or unlucky breaks to the ball to bounce one way up. A flag on a pass interference that everyone thought was pretty questionable. But again, to your point, what are we talking about? The difference between being closer to 500 rather than closer to the top 2 or 3 picks in the draft? Like it's not like if you squint hard enough, the Giants have been done dirty and they should be 7-2 right now. It's like if throw another win on the schedule, and what does it actually impact? It doesn't impact anything, to be quite honest with you.
And it's funny too, because as we think about, you mentioned like matchups and starting to compare some of these players in this, and obviously Giants fans are getting, right in your face. Jaden Daniels in the division, the what could have been if the Giants were able to move up the board and make some different decisions in the draft, if that was even a possibility. But it's funny too, because Daniel Jones, Jaden Daniels. Well, it's 209 yards for Jaden Daniels. It's 174 for Daniel Jones. Talk about like that overall stat numbers, right? The Giants, by the way, because you mentioned that before, looking at team stats, the Giants had more first downs. The Giants had more passing first downs. The Giants, you mentioned conversions. Washington did well there as well. It's 358 total yards to 326. It's 60 total plays to 59, right? So everything about this, and then also time of possession, narrowly in the favor of the Giants. There's so many things you'd look at, and even a cleaner game from a penalty standpoint, although a couple of critical ones, 4 for 51 for Big Blue in this game. But when we start to compare down on an individual level, the other thing I thought about was, it's only 174 yards passing for Daniel Jones. He does some good things in this game. The QBR represents that at 72.5. And then you even go the layer deeper, though, right? Because I wanted to come in and say, well, it's only 16 carries for Tyrone Tracy Jr. for 66 yards, and he's been playing well, and you want him to continue to expand that role. But you do have to go total picture here and say, but Daniel Jones ran at 7 for 54, scrambles or not. Devin Singletary, 7 for 33, right? So you end up with 31 because Darius Slayton also had that 11-yard rushing play. 31 runs to 26 pass plays. So I can't even make the argument on, well, you should have leaned in more into your identity running the ball. They did. They were trying to do that. It's just that it's not a good enough team overall. What were some of those key things when it comes to positional matchups that even go beyond did things well, could have done more? No, I come away with like, well, it's just because Washington's a better team. They have a better quarterback, and they're just better, maybe better coached right now too. No knock on Dable and the staff, but it just seems like a reality, right?
Yeah, and Adam, it's funny because every time you feel like there's something good, there's always another thing that's horrifically bad with the Giants. It's like I thought going into that, their option plays for Daniel Jones to be able to take it and make reads on what the edge rusher was going to do and either hand the ball to Tyrone Tracy or Devin Singletary or keep it himself was genius. The Washington Commanders could not stop the Giants whenever they were doing that. So kudos to the coaching staff for doing that. Then obviously we'll talk about it in a little bit. The 2-point conversion stuff it felt a little bit silly because it's like, well, the analytics say to go for it, and it's like, have you been watching this team though? Like that you're basing the analytics on a team that's good at these things. The Giants are not good. Right?
We can get into that because we can jump around here a little bit because just on a high level, chat GPT, AI driven, algorithms that you can input information to and then get feedback on. It all feels similar to, when you're talking about what do the stats tell us, what do the analytics tell us that we're supposed to do by the percentages. I want to like feed it into chat GPT and say, hey, based on what this team is, and the AI doesn't know this team the way the fans do, but based on what this team is, should they be following analytics the way that good teams do? And I feel like the feedback would be, well, you look back over the last 4 seasons, the New York Football Giants suck. No, they should be basing it on personnel and success rates of their own, not, well, by the numbers, the league average says you go for it here. What does the Giants tell you they should do, right? What do their stats tell you they should be doing in those moments?
Adam, so if you are the out at wide receiver and I am the quarterback in that scenario, and they say, well, obviously the numbers say we got to go for it. We got to go for 2. Like, wouldn't you use a little bit of context there to be like, I don't know if Adam's going to be able to high point a fade route in the corner of the end zone. Never mind Andy being able to actually throw the ball or collect a snap. So like, it just feels like there's more nuance. People that just talk about, oh, well, the data said it, the numbers say it. You got to understand the numbers. Like, yes, I get it. If you are an average team or an above average offense, like it makes sense to apply pressure the way that they do. Unfortunately for the Giants, it didn't really make sense in that situation. I also didn't love the play calls that they had. They kind of rolled out. They eliminated half the field. I think Bobby Skinner at Talking Giants talked about that a little bit. Like, it was a choice route for Wan'Dale and no one else over there. It's like, what was the play call intended? Especially like knowing how well they were running the ball too. It's almost like, why not run the ball in that scenario and say our offensive line has been manhandling them? Like, to me, it just, not only was the decision to go for 2 not the right thing, but then also the play call wasn't the right thing. And so when we go from giving them flowers for the way that they schematically like decided to run the ball in this game, you go confounded on the other side and be like, are you watching the same team I am? Because this doesn't really make too much sense to me.
Yeah, when all of your critical runners, including Daniel Jones, are all averaging 4 yards plus, and it's down in there. We understand you're a couple yards away from the goal line. What are you putting yourself in a position for? And you've been better run versus pass pro over the course of the day. Dan Duggan was also talking about those 2 plays and the 2-point conversions. I will, because I brought this up over on X as well. The second 2-point conversion makes no sense because the middle of the end zone is completely empty except for Washington Commanders players because there's nobody running any routes there. You're just like, all right, I guess, like you say, we're running these weird there's an option route for Wan'Dale, but the other options are like helping the Commanders use the boundaries in the end zone to defend against us. Now, on the first one, I will say, whether or not, like, this goes back to pass protection now and maybe the debate of like, maybe just try to run the ball on the 2-point conversion. As Daniel Jones is climbing the pocket, you do see that I believe it's Darius Slayton coming across the middle of the end zone, and they had another route on the right side that was running towards, that was a comeback route at the pylon, essentially. So it looks like if there's an extra half a second there, you're going to get Slayton moving across the end zone. The linebacker is still holding down. You probably can make that play. Now, on the high level of, has pass protection been good enough through the course of the game? Are some of these things scrambles for Daniel Jones? And we saw him with the touchdown where, like, listen, flashbacks of the Dallas game where he hurt his neck because he was going for it and wanted to get the job done. Instead here, like, he lowers the shoulder, shrugs off another defender and gets in there, right? So there were some of those moments, but it was frustrating from that aspect of it. And I think even if analytics, damn the analytics, just think about what your team's capable of. I don't care that they're going for 2-point. Great, go for 2-point conversions all game long,
Right.
because you're a 2-6 team, and does it really matter in the end? But then when you see the execution of it, I think that's what we're both speaking to. It's like, I don't even care whether or not you won or lost the game. Sometimes it's just the play design and the way that you go about trying to do those things that actually tells me more maybe about where the coaching staff is and where some of the play designs over the course of a 60-minute game, we do find ourselves going, it just seems like something's not quite there, whether that's personnel driven or otherwise. You have those moments every single week with this team.
Yeah, and usually the calling card for the Giants is their ability to get pressure on the opposing quarterback.
That's the other
And
part
the Giants could not get any pressure against Bobby Johnson's offensive line of the Washington Commanders. And that was the tough
right in your
part for
face,
me.
am I right?
Yeah, yeah. Talk about a slap in the face. Jaden Daniels, the guy that Daboll wanted, is throwing it behind the line of Bobby Johnson, who was just with the whole thing is just, very poetic. But Adam, the issue is Jaden Daniels is an awesome, awesome quarterback. The Giants not being able to get pressure on him allowed him, he didn't even have to throw the ball all that much in this game because they
Right.
were already up 21-7 at halftime. He was like, all right, let's just manage this game out. But the fact the Giants couldn't get pressure meant that you're leaving that secondary out on
Right.
an island all alone. And it really ends up showing where or how far away Deontay Banks right now is from being like a number one type cornerback that can handle a guy like Terry McLaurin, who I think is a very good wide receiver, but he's not a top 5, top 7, top 10 wide receiver in the league right
No.
now. Like
No.
it only gets worse from there. Like these wide receivers that he's going to have to cover are more athletic, can run more routes maybe than Scary Terry. But to me, I just looked at the secondary, just kind of being left out there, knowing that the team couldn't get pressure. Was that what you noticed on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, listen, as you mentioned there in terms of the pressure, just to crystallize it, tackles for a loss, 3 for the Giants, 2 pass deflections, 2 QB hits, right? So I mean, you're not getting there. You're not getting around Jaden Daniels enough. And I think you bring up the really good point just when you talk about Daniels and you say, well, only 209 yards. Yeah, 15 to 22 though. And it's only 26 pass attempts for Jones, but the game dictates it, right? You're up 21-7. The second half was basically like, well, prove it. Prove that you can get close enough where we actually have to be concerned about you coming back in this game and us having to go up and put up more points. And you end up only having to do a couple more field goals. 96 QBR, 128.8 rating for him. And yes, when we talk about Deontay Banks, because that was a part of that 12-minute chunk in the second quarter before the half, it almost felt like, of course, what's going to be the crystallizing moment here for the secondary in that regard for this defense on the season? It's Deontay Banks being able to clearly see the 3 on the back of his jersey, a wide receiver over the top on him, and a touchdown, where it just does not feel like he can positionally stay with these players, where he's functionally able to get his head around to maybe make a play on the ball, whether he's get beat in the line or he gets beat deeper in the route, loses the guy in coverage. And I mean, you saw it I really in that moment too for Deontay Banks, because I feel bad for him. And we all want him to play better and to come back next season or over the second half of the season, go, oh, okay, he started to figure some things out here. But he was dejected after the touchdown. I mean, it was just like, it wasn't, I don't mean pissed, like Daniel Jones when he shouldered down and got that touchdown and gave out a violent scream, because that dude is pissed, I think, about everything that's happened for his career, whether it's self-inflicted or not. Deontay Banks, it was like, gave the touchdown. He was kind of like, yep, that's the way it is for me right now. And it's a bummer, but it really felt like that indicative moment when we think about this team this season. It's been Deontay Banks in big moments with big spots. And to your point, I think that's a top 20 wide receiver. I don't think he's a top 10 wide receiver, making a big play and helping to really bury this team before they had a chance in this game.
And they were able to spread the ball around. It stinks because the only 2 catches that Deontay Banks gave up to Terry McLaurin were both touchdown passes, which is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Doesn't give up a lot, but when you give it up, it's everything.
Yeah, it literally costs you the game. The other thing is when you look at that cornerback room, you can just see that they're just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic right now. When you have, Cordell Flott on the outside, then you have some Nick McLeod, then all of a sudden Adoree Jackson comes in for a few snaps, and they're just trying to do anything. And it wasn't even Terry McLaurin who led the team in catches. Noah Brown had 60 yards. Zacchaeus had 48 yards. Austin Eckler had that big catch over the middle. It just felt like these wide receivers, no matter whether it was wide receiver 1 or 2 or whatever, were just constantly getting open and moving the ball down the field. And so the secondary, I look at it's tough because it's like a chicken or the egg thing, Adam, for me, where if the defensive line would have gotten pressure, it would have made the secondary probably look a little better. Ball has to come out faster, less time for them to defend. But even out in space, Drew Phillips missed a few tackles.
Yeah.
Tyler Nubin missed a few tackles. It felt sloppy and undisciplined on the back end. And so who do you kind of circle more? Do you look at the defensive line and say, man, if they would have just got more pressure, then we wouldn't have exposed how bad our secondary is? Or do you think, listen, secondary, when the defensive line isn't getting the pressure that they need, you need to wrap up and tackle or make a big player or, take a guy down, punch the ball out, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Tyler Nubin, rookie, right? You're talking about Drew Phillips, who we like, rookie. We like both these players, right? But they're rookies. And it's not an excuse for not making open field tackles or missing plays, but you obviously give a little bit of leeway to it. We go back to the offseason. We get your Brian Burns. It's all you get, and you don't get upset. Okay, fine. We're happy with that. So, and this, you said chicken or egg. There is a little bit there because you're talking about, well, and no one's taking off plays. But what do you want Dexter Lawrence to do? This guy, you know what I mean? He's putting up sack numbers, sack numbers, sack numbers. The team sucks again. You're losing all these games. You know the secondary is weak, right? So this is the part where, balance of roster construction does matter. Was there the player out there to go get to bolster the secondary? Maybe, maybe not. Would keeping Xavier McKinney at a very high price point have changed the dynamic of this secondary? Certainly it would seem like, because with their inability to force turnovers on the back end of this team as well. So it does to me just feel like no matter what the understanding was of where the roster is, it's just not good enough, right? And it is the part that I think we'll talk about as we discuss trade deadline coming up on the show, as we talk about where the state of this roster is overall. We know you can't solve every problem in one offseason or one draft class, but you can do it better. But there are better versions of how you allocate your money and the picks that you spend them and who you bring in. It's not a knock on a Tyler Nubin or on a Drew Phillips. Were there better, different options? Because you have addressed other areas of the team in the draft and spent free agent money looking at the secondary. So, I mean, these are all kind of like high-level philosophical questions that we'll continue to examine. And it's why things are interesting when we think about Joe Shane and we think about Brian Dable. Something else we're going to discuss when it comes to the deadline here going forward. The last note I do want to make, and then your closing thoughts as well. You talked about McLaurin, couple of big plays. One of the other things that I think crystallized for me in a game like this too is Commanders aren't a great defense by any stretch. And when you go inside the wide receiver room now for the Giants and you see Malik Neighbors, you go 9 catches. Hey, this guy's doing the work, but only 59 yards, right? You then go into and you look at, to me, when you start to look at his box score now, this is what you're seeing the shift since he's come back from the concussion and gotten back out there on the field. Last 3 games, okay, 9 receptions on 11 targets, just 59 yards. 7 catches on 13, 71 yards. It's not a bad game, but number 1 wide receiver, big explosive, right? 2 weeks before that against Dallas, 115 yards. But that's on 12 catches even, right? And then, of course, only the 4 for 41 going back to that Philadelphia ugly loss. This is the other part about roster construction. Hey, now teams are going to start to look, wins and losses be damned, at the number 1 wide receiver and say, well, let's take him off the table. Darius Slayton isn't a bad player, but is he a solid, true number 2? You look at what Wan'Dale Robinson couldn't and didn't do in this game with just 3 catches for 10 yards. This is the part, again, of this team just is not good enough. And that to me, maybe back to the top, right? What's the critical moment? The critical moment is just knowing that over the last few weeks, we've learned where this team is. They can't get over the mistakes. They can't get over some of the hurdles, and they can't get over the deficiencies of this team, even having that number 1 wideout.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, the thing that shocked me, you talked a little bit about Malik Neighbors not being able to put up the numbers, especially in the last few weeks. My big issue is what's happened to Wan'Dale Robinson. We
Yeah.
talk about some of the separation that he was able to get. You heard CeeDee Lamb talk about Wan'Dale Robinson as a guy like to keep an eye out for. And it feels like he's been resorted to a guy that catches a 2 or 3 yard ball with nowhere to go and no creativity at all. I mean, Adam, halfway through the game, he had -6 yards in this game. And
Yeah.
obviously, a lot of that can be pointed to Daniel Jones not being able to stretch the field vertically. A lot
Yep.
of it can be the play calls and that they were running the ball well in this game. But to me, you're talking about all these high draft picks that we've mentioned before. What we've talked about Jalen Hyatt, like what is he going to be? If you don't know what you have in Wan'Dale Robinson or what the expectation is for what his floor should be from week to week, then
Yeah.
the Giants have a whole host of other issues where you turn around and say, Slayton might be gone. Hyatt might not be the answer. Is Wan'Dale really a number 2 wide receiver? All of a sudden, this wide receiver room has Malik Neighbors and a whole lot of question marks as you go into next season.
Yeah, and you mentioned that three catches for 10 yards in this game, negative for a big stretch of it. 5 for 30 the week prior, 6 for 23 before that. All the damage that he was doing, Wan'Dale Robinson, early in the year, you can look at it and you get up over through that Dallas game, even 20-15. So the first 4 games of the season, you're talking about almost basically 200 yards receiving for Wan'Dale Robinson. After that, even though the Seattle game, it's like he's accumulating yards, but the average yards per catch, 3.3, 3.8, 6. Like he hasn't broken over 6.5 yards per catch per game since that Dallas game where it was 6.5 per reception, 8.7, 9, 7.3 in the season opener, right? So all those elements look to be trending in the wrong direction. And that, to your point, is concerning when we think about getting a number 1 and making life easier. We didn't even get to, by the way, touch on Theo Johnson at all, who had plenty of moments of frustration. And then once again, he's done that thing where he had that great catch down the seam. Like that little flash is enough to get the Giants fan base excited. And also, as is only Big Blue fashion, all the frustration that comes before that. So you still have to be like, yeah, well, if only you were doing that throughout the game, maybe we're having a different conversation. We have trade deadline coverage here coming up on our next conversation. What do we want to see the Giants do? What could they do? Who's coming for those players? And what will it tell us about this regime? We'll dive into that next time on OGP. But until then, until the next times, I messed it up again. As Andrew Mackos would want, need, nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.